Hi there, I thought I would go ahead and tape a video on factoring quadratics when a is not equal to 1. Now we talked about factoring quadratics, and quadratics are equations that have a square in them, an x squared or an a squared or any variable to the second power, and that is the highest degree. So looking at all of these here, these are all quadratics. They also include like a squared minus 4, or just a squared is a quadratic. Now it's not a trinomial, but it's a quadratic. So I'm looking to make sure that they have squareds in there. Now we talked about how to factor it when we have a is not equal to 1, a is equal to 1. So now I want to work on how to factor when a is not equal to 1. So we talked about the standard form of a quadratic being in this form right here. And I wanted to take that a little bit further because this actual organizer talks about this in terms of the first term, the middle term, and the last term. So when they say F, when they say M, and when they say L, that's what we're talking about. So we need to think about this, and they have, like we did, A times C, so it's first times last, which is the same, but we're going to keep our variables this time. When A is not equal to 1, you're going to need to keep your variable. And then the middle term, I'm going to keep the variable there, and I'll show you how this works in just a second. So we'll just go ahead and use this example to kind of go through everything. So this is what I start with every single time. I have a is equal to 6. I can't factor 6 out. 6 is not a factor of 13x. It's not a factor of 5. So I have to go with this form where I have, I'm going to have an x, and then I'm going to put those values into a grid or a box. So I start with this. My first step is I take my first term and my last term, multiply it, put it in the top box right there, 30x squared. Next step is I put my middle term in the bottom, 13x. How I use the box, it says I put my first term from my quadratic in the top left hand grid or box, and I put my last term in the bottom right hand box. So that's kind of how you set it up. Now, moving forward, we kind of think the same way that we did before. Here, I'm looking for my two factors of 30x squared that add up to be 13x. So, and I'm going to include the variable here, and that ends up being 10x and 3x. So everything so far is the same, except for we've added the variables here. So whenever I have this box here, and it's 6x squared and 5, I want to go ahead, since I have my grid here, and fill in the 10x down here and the 3x here. Okay? So I fill in my other boxes with these two values here that I found in my x factor. So now, here's the little tricky part. What this is, and I was working with somebody earlier, and it's a little bit easier if you take a sheet of paper and you think of it as one row at a time and one column at a time. So right now, just ignore the bold numbers that are on the outside. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at my two numbers that are inside the box in row 1, and I say, what is my greatest common factor between the two? And that is 3x. I can 6 and 3, the common factor is a 3, and x squared and x, the greatest common factor is x. I don't have to give you the results. You just have to tell me what that greatest common factor is, and I put it out here on this edge. Moving on to the second row, or the bottom row, I can look at 10x and 5 and know that of these two terms, 5 is my greatest common factor. So I factor out a 5. Then I go over here, and I'm going to do the same thing to my columns. And so I can see that I have a 2x that I can factor out of both of those terms. I put it above the box, or above the column. And then here I have a 3x and a 5. There's nothing, so I have to put a 1. The greatest common factor is just 1. So from this stage, I have my two binomials. I have 3x plus 5 and 2x plus 1. And that's what it is. And you can always check your answer by foiling. And it is equal to 6x squared plus 13x plus 5. And you can work that out on your own. So I want to do a couple of examples just to get us started because I think it's important for you to work with these. So practicing, first thing I'm going to do is I put my 3x squared times 21 and I'm going to multiply those two together and it's going to be 63x squared. Okay, I think 3 times 21 is 63. And then b is going to be 16x. Now I have to think, what two factors of 63 can I add up to be 16x? And the only factors of 63 are 3 and 21, 9 and 7, and 1 and 63, I think. So from here I go, I think it's 3 and 9 and 7. So I'm going to put 9x and I'm going to put 7x. And they add up to be 16x. I'm going to move to my box. It tells me up here, I put my first term here. I put my last term down here. And then moving from there, I put 9x here and I put 7x here. And then I just work with my first row. My common factor in this row is just x, because 3 and 7 do not have common factor. From here, my common factor here is going to be 3, because 9 and 21, my greatest common factor is 3. Then I move to my columns, and I have 3x squared and 9, so I have a 3x, which works perfectly. And then I have a 7x and a 21, and I have a 7. So in this case, I have a x plus 3 times 3x plus 7. And it's probably not coming natural to you right now, but it will with practice. So moving on along, we'll do a couple more. And I want to deal with some negatives. So I'm going to skip down here to my third example here. So I'm going to fill in some stuff. I'm going to fill in my first. I'm going to fill in my last. I'm going to fill in 4x squared times negative 2 is negative 8x squared. And then I have negative 7x. Okay. So I have to think of what are my factors of 8 that will add up to be negative 8 that will add up to be negative 7. And that's going to be negative 8x and positive 1x. So I'm going to put a negative 8x down here, and I'm going to put a positive 1x here. And you can just put x, but I don't know why I put a 1x. So working with my rows first, common factor between the two is x. This one, I like this one because they're both negatives. And if they are both negatives, or my leading one is negative, I need to factor out a negative number, and I can factor out a 2. And that will help you tremendously. Okay? So go ahead and you have to see they're both negatives, or this first one is negative, factor out a negative 2. And then looking at my columns, here I can factor out a 4x, and here I can factor out a 1. So moving on forward, I just do x minus 2, and then I do 4x plus 1. And let's make sure that we're right. So I do first times first, just 4x squared. I do outside, plus 1x. I do inside, negative 8x. And then I do last, which is negative 2. And so that becomes 4x squared minus 7x minus 2. And these two match up. Therefore, I have factored correctly. So that kind of gets you started. I know it's confusing. Once you do a lot of them, though, it becomes less confusing and it becomes more automatic. So that's how you factor when a is not equal to 1.